In this video, what I'd like to talk about is presentation through dry mounting. And dry mounting was a standard way of exhibiting your photograph back in the old days, the 30s and the 40s and the 50s and the 60s, and then it started to change and people started to have different ideas. Instead of presenting your photograph through dry mounting, they began to switch over to just cutting mats. But dry mounting is still very, I think, an effective way to present your photograph, and I have here on the board a dry mounted print, and then I'm going to do one for you after this. Here is a dry mounted print. It's a fiber print that I made back in the 70s. One reason why we dry mount a photograph or cut a mat is to separate the photograph from the visual world. In other words, this is everything all around here is chaos, and it's kind of hard to handle a photograph, especially when it's being presented, if there's no barrier between the image and the rest of the world. So by cutting the photograph exactly what you want the viewer to see, and by adhering it to a board with generous proportioned borders around it, it gives you an area to sign the print. And this is from up northern Minnesota from years ago. So I'd say Jay Cook Park, early 70s or whenever. And then I'd put my name. You always write in pencil. So I'd say Will Agar, and this is, what year is this? This is 2014. Then it's a complete statement. And you can also, because I keep it in a 8x10 board or 11x14 or 16x20, you can always find a nice inexpensive frame to put it in easily. So what we're going to do in this lesson is I'll show you how to take your photograph, put dry mounting tissue on the back of it, trim it to size, and then you're going to place it harmoniously on the white board. And we're going to use a secret formula that came from the Photolab Index, which was the encyclopedia for photographers back in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s and sort of in the 60s, and then the information revolution became too much and it started to disappear. I've got a little space here that I'm going to demonstrate putting the tissue on the back of the print. I'll just clean it off, make sure the area is clean. Here's a photograph. And actually, as I'm looking at the photograph, I do notice that there's a little spot here. So after I dry mount it, then I'll retouch it. Some photographers actually like to dry mount first, then retouch. And then some like to retouch and then dry mount. So I suppose it depends on which you're worse at. But this is going to be an easy one to retouch because there's a little dot there. So now, what we want to do is turn the print over, and here's the back of the 8x10, and I'm going to pull out a sheet of dry mount tissue. And this manufacturer, Bang Fang, it's a color mount, it's a permanent dry mount tissue for all papers, products, black and white, and color, and RC photographs. Here's another one by Seal, kind of the same idea. And then of course you can also buy larger sheets. 11x14, you can get 16x20, 20x24, and you can also get it in rolls. As it gets bigger, it of course gets more expensive. So I'll just pull out a sheet of this tissue, and if you look at it, it kind of looks like, I don't know, kind of reminds me of wax paper that you might want to, except this stuff, when it's heated up, is going to melt. And when it melts and then cools, it's going to dry and adhere the photograph to the board that you're mounting it on. So I'm going to align this up as best I can, and I will be trimming it. So now I'm going to take my tacking iron. This is a tacking iron made by Seal. Seal not only has tacking irons, they all got dry mount presses. In the old days, people didn't want to buy these, and they would sometimes use irons and things like that. But this product allows you to just touch it right in the middle and just kind of slowly drag it just a little and let the tissue melt. And then where the tissue melts, that makes it hold on to the photograph. See? So now it's stuck there. Now what I'm going to do is I am going to trim the photograph's white borders off, and then the photograph and the dry mount tissue will be exactly the same size. So let's do that now. So I have a little pad here to cut on, and I have a nice utility blade with a fairly fresh blade. Actually, if you're doing a project, you do want a fresh blade, because as you cut into the photograph, if it's dull, then you might get shredding instead of sharpness. And then If you have an easel that gives you a perfectly square image, then you can just use a straight edge to cut off the white borders. However, I know that I used an easel that had 4 blades, and those 4-bladed easels are a little notorious in not being exactly square. I mean, it looks square, but then when you actually cut it and measure it, you discover it's off just a hair. So what I'll do is I'll choose one side and accept this as being the basis for my straight edge, and I'll take a kind of a heavy right angle straight edge, and I'll simply use that to cut the white border off on the bottom. And when I use the mat knife, I just kind of lightly score it once, and then I score it again. A little pressure, and the pressure is going down. My hand is simply pushing down, and we'll do it one more time for the coup de grace. And there we go. There's the tissue and the border coming off. Get rid of that. Now at this point, I am going to use the functionality of the right angle. So I'm going to line this up with the bottom. That looks good. And I can already see that my borders aren't exactly square, but this will make it square because I got a little more of the image here, a little less here. So I'll be trimming this just like that. So here we go. Scoring it once, scoring it twice, and a third time. Oh, third time is the charm. Is it? It is. So now we got that. Now let's go and do the top part of the photograph. Some of you may be wondering what the heck this photograph is. It's a picture of an old chair in the backyard before we threw it away, and those are morning glories behind it. And the chair was bright pink, which of course you can't see because it's black and white. And we'll trim off this guy once and twice. Oh, and I gotta go 3 times. There we go. And our final cutting here. Good. Press down to hold it down, and here we go. 1, 2, and 3. Oh, it's already done. So there we go. Now we have our photograph trimmed to size. White borders are gone, and the tacking tissue trimmed to size, so it's exactly the same. And now let me get a piece of mat board, and I'll show you how to position this in the mat board using a secret formula, a secret recipe. So here I have a pre-cut board. This board is 14 by 18 inches. This board is 4-ply rag board. So the rag board, pricey, 4-ply, a little thick but bendy. You want rag board because if you're going to dry mount a photograph, you want the rag board to last a long time. If you buy a board that's not rag, after a few years it starts to fox or turn yellow. And the photograph, properly prepared, fiber-based, will last 100 years. So you want the whole thing to last 100 years plus. So now the big question is, where should we put this photograph on the board? We could put it in the center so that the sides, the top and the bottom, are all kind of the same. But actually, when you do that, it looks like it's kind of dropping a little bit visually. It's a psychological thing, especially with photographs this size. So then what we do is we resort to using my little secret formula that'll give us the visual center, which is different than the actual center. The visual center has more space on the bottom than on the top, and the sides are equal distance. So let me show you this formula. Let's go to the blackboard as if we are in a classroom, okay? So let's go. Let's take any size mat board, and I'll just draw this out here. And then let's take any object of art that's flat that you want a dry mount or even cut a mat for, and I'm gonna put that piece of art in the upper left-hand corner the measurements so that you can actually physically, and I will show you, I'll be doing this physically with using a pencil and a ruler, but we'll show you this. This is the blueprint, and then we'll take it from there. Now, when it's in the upper left-hand corner, this is the space that remains. So what I'll do is use a ruler, measure it, and find the halfway point. And what I'll do is, wherever that halfway point is, I'll mark it also down here. I'll use a straight edge to divide the space. In other words, this is the remaining space. If you divide it in half, take this image, photograph or whatever, and move it over here, then automatically, ipso facto, you will get a left-hand border. So you have your right and your left automatically for your visual center. Now, here's the secret. You're going to also take this space here, you're going to mark it over here on this side, and then using a straight edge, oh, here's my straight edge, don't go away. Using a straight edge, you'll go from the bottom left of the photograph or art to where the halfway point is on the right-hand side, and you'll make a little mark right here. And this is where the bottom of your photograph will go, right there, or your artwork. So if you put this corner here and align the photograph right up with this pencil line, it is in what we call the visual center. There'll be a little more space on the bottom than the top, but it will be done harmoniously, just like the Greeks talked about. So this is called the visual center. And this I ripped out of the Photolab Index from, what, 1940 or something. So now, watch me do it using a pencil, a ruler, and the actual photograph. Now I've got my board out here, and then I have my photograph, and we adhered the tissue to the back of the photograph, and the problem is, where is that visual center? So using the recipe from the Photolab Index, I'll flip the photograph over, put it in the upper left-hand corner, just like so, and then taking a pencil, I'll mark the limits of the photograph, top, right, bottom, left, and I'm going to be erasing these little marks later, so just make them light. And now I'll put my photograph aside, don't need that, and I'll get my ruler here, and I'll measure the remaining space, and it looks like it's about 6 1/8, which I believe is 5/8. So then what I'll do is write 6 5/8. I got to divide that in half, so I'm thinking this is heavy math for me. So divided in half, I believe it's 3 5/16. So I will go 1 inch, 2 inches, 3 inches, and now I got to go 16ths. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and there's the middle, close enough, right in there. Now, is that really what it is? Let's just make sure that that really is, yeah, so there it is. There's the midpoint. So now I'm going to go down to the bottom, and I'll go 3 and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I'll mark that down at this point right there, lightly because I got to erase it. Now, then I'm going to take and just make a very, very light line, which I'll be erasing partially. Make little noises. There you go, just like that. So now we have the right-hand border, and so and I'll just kind of look at it quickly, make sure it's believable. And yeah, I'd say that's believable. Okay, so now over on the left-hand side, I have to measure this space. So this space happens to be, oh, lovely, 9. That's so easy. So 9, half of 9 is 4 1/2. I like math like that. 4 1/2. So now here's the secret. Go from the bottom of the print to the halfway point on the other side, so it creates a diagonal. Just make a little mark right here. See, right there? And now that's going to be where the bottom of my photograph is going to go. I just make it cover the line slightly, and I look at it, make sure it really does look decent. That looks pretty good. So now what we're going to do is go back to the dry mount press, and what I'm going to do is lift up the photograph and just tack the tissue right here and up here at the top. So I'm adhering the tissue to the board. So the tissue is already adhered to the photograph, but then I'm going to adhere the tissue to the mounting board, and then we're ready to put it into the dry mount press. So let's go in the back of the room and do that. I'm back here again with Mr. Tacking Iron and Mrs. Dry Mounting Press. So one thing I've done with the dry mounting press is I've preheated it. So it's been heating up for a while, and I've kept the tacking iron on so that I can now tack the tissue to the actual board. And if you recall, I'm going to move the tissue so it's just covering these lines so that I don't have to erase those lines. I'll cover and hide them. So I'm just going to take this tacking iron and kind of touch it and move it a little bit and make sure that it adheres. And now I'll go up to the top part and I'll line that up so it just covers. Lift up the photograph, tack the tissue to the mount board like so. Good. So now I'm going to take one last look at the photograph positioned on the mat board just to make sure that it looks decent and my math isn't off. It looks pretty good. So now let's go look at this funny dry mount press. The main manufacturer of dry mount presses is Seal, and I think Bogan had a line also. And so this model here is Seal. They've come in small, 8 by 10, 11 by 14. This I believe is a 16 by 20. I've got one at my house that handles a 20 by 24. Of course, the larger they are, the more heavier they are, and the more expensive they are. But you'll find some in art schools and stuff like that. They're still very, very useful for this somewhat archaic process. So I've taken the dry mount press and I've turned it on. I've warmed it up for at least 10-15 minutes. And so now I'll lift up the top like this, and then sandwiched on the inside I have two boards. You want these boards to be clean because if there's any dust or grit or anything, and you sandwich and try and dry mount your photograph, if there's dirt, it will embed in the surface of your photograph, and then you've got little craters in your photograph. And likewise, if you have dust underneath the photograph, then you have little mountains on your photograph. So you got to be really clean, really scrupulous. If that's a word, is that a word? Scrupulous. So I'm going to put these guys in here like so, and then I'm going to take my photograph. I'm going to slip it in underneath the two boards, so there's a little sandwich. You know, when you think about it, you could use this and make like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You could make about 10 grilled sandwiches all at once, except the cheese would get all over the place. So now I'm going to press it down like this, flattening it, and look, the light comes on and it's going to start blinking as it cooks away. And for fiber, you probably want to go at least 30, 45 seconds, minute. A fiber, you really can't destroy it, so you can go for a while. With RC, if you can do R or color, if you do RC or color, or inkjet, then you for sure want to test it with a dummy piece of paper or something, and probably about 30 seconds is all you need. And so the tissue is melting right now, and then when we pull it out, I'm going to put it under a plate. You don't have to put it under this plate, but it keeps it nice and flat, and so that when it dries flat, and also the tissue as it cools and hardens will make sure that it adheres to the photograph. So let's pull out our photograph, because I think I've talked long enough, and we'll see what we got here. Once I pull it out, watch out, it's hot in there, I'll flex it slightly, give it a little bend, and see if it pops off. And I see one corner needs a little bit more, so I'm going to put it back in. Give it a little more time. This time I'm looking at a clock. Give it about another 30 seconds. So now let's pull this in. Now, looks better. Put this down like that, nice and flat. Let it cool off under this nice Seal weight. Now I can turn this guy off because we don't need him anymore because it sucks up a lot of electricity. So once it's dry, then what I'll do is take a kneaded eraser, I'll show you, or a gum eraser, and I erase all the little pencil marks, and we'll do that, and then and then you can sign it that way. 100 years from now, when somebody finds this beautiful image dry mounted in somebody's attic, and people will say, "Oh, where did this come from?" They'll know. And so, because this has happened to me where I haven't signed things and then could get thrown away or nobody knows who did it. So don't be Mr. or Mrs. Anonymous. Go on in the future with your name attached to your artwork. So let's take this guy off now. And let's go back to the front of the room, and I'm going to erase these marks that you see here. But that looks nice, and it has a sense of authority and dignity. And I have gotten rid of those white borders, and now we have the nice large borders. It's ready. This is 14 by 18. I could go get a frame and stick that on the wall. The next video now, we're going to talk about presenting this work, but instead of dry mounting, which involves a tacking iron, and involves a dry mount press, and it involves tissue, which is getting a little long in the tooth. It's getting archaic. So, but it's still, I think it's the classic way of presenting your photographs. So the alternative way is to cut a mat. So that's what we'll cover in our next lecture, cutting a mat for exhibitions or for your own work hanging on the wall. Okay, now I'm going to start erasing. I'm using a kneaded or gum eraser, and they're good because it doesn't smear the pencil lines. So let's just start at the top here where I first put my pencil marks there, and I go here, go down. And now the nice thing about the fact that when I dry mount the photograph over the line, I just go right up to the photograph, and I don't have to, run it all the way down like that. Oh, here's another one right here. Let's get this. There we go, got that. And over here. And if you're using 4-ply ragboard, it also erases very well. Cheap ragboard might not do such a good job. Get rid of all of that. And then, essential for the arsenal of a photographer, or people who just like to be clean, is a little whisk thing. You can kind of go like that. Get that all off there like that. Very nice. Molto bene. So now we're ready to put my, I forget what it calls. I think it's called The Conversation. It's a little dialogue between an old chair, pink, being thrown away with beautiful roses on it, and the morning glories. It's an early morning conversation. Will Agar, whenever I took it, but this year is 2014. Here's an essential thing, a little whisk broom that you can dust your stuff. And also you can use it for costumes. You can make a great big mustache on your face, and you can go to costume parties with this, and people will think you're quite odd. Especially when you wear your goggles like this with your glasses and you put this thing on. There you go.